a Moto Premier from not that long ago. The 4 Fire Drinker Satyrs in the sideboard is something that I recall being pretty specific. But in any case, James is sitting here at 6-0 with the deck. The mana base, he has to unfortunately dip into Boros Guild Gates to supplement his Sacred Foundries and Temple of Triumphs, some mountains, and then 4 copies of Nykthos. So yes, we've talked about a little bit the range of decks from those splashing, 1 Nykthos for value to those that are really built around it, and James's deck is definitely in the latter camp.
I mean, this feels basically like a Nykthos mirror, honestly. That's just a Gruul Guild Gate to start here for Nicolo's side. Excuse me, for Nicolo. I apologize.
And for the first time all day, we've had matching Guild Gates on the first turn.
Yes.
For Nicolo and Boros for James.
Really, it's about time, as here is a Nykthos, but not another red source. And you see there are some Burning Tree Emissaries over there as Nicolo's hand, but he cannot play them. So James is going to play a Burning Tree Emissary of his own, followed with a Rakdos Cackler, Unleashed, and pass the turn back. So not a bad start here for Gates.
And Nicolo here looks like he has another Nykthos in his hand, but no third land that he can play. James off to a great start.
Yeah, things not breaking the way that the Red-Green Devotion would like to, as here is Temple of Triumph. Going to keep the top card up. Gates looks like we're going to see an Ashes Zealot now. That's exactly what we're going to see, and come across here for 6 points of damage. So a very, very aggressive start, but the thing about this deck is that it can play a longer game and really just pump out some big-time threats here.
And another Nykthos off the top, taunting Nicolo, and I actually suspect he may have 8 cards in his hand at this point, but I don't know if he's even going to survive this turn. So.
Yeah, he may or may not have to discard, not entirely sure, but James says, all right, I'm going to come across for a bunch more damage, put you down to 8, and if James has any follow-up threat, this game is basically over. What he has right now may just be good enough. His Sacred Foundry is going to come into play untapped. Maybe a Fanatic. Okay, 2 Frostburn Weirds, and then follow up with Fanatic. Nicolo's going to draw a Mountain. So see if he can do anything crazy this turn.
There'd have to be a lot of Burning Tree Emissaries.
Yeah.
But this is not unheard of.
Yep. And we do have confirmation that Nicolo did mulligan down to 6, so he's perfectly fine on card hand size. So it's good to go. But I don't know if there's anything he can do to get himself out of this situation here, and there is nothing. He's going to pack it up. So James Gates does win game number 1. Red-White Devotion up a game over Red-Green Devotion. As we'll go to the Red-Green Devotion sideboard here, we didn't really see very much of what Nicolo can do. Now, you do have 4 copies of Mizian Mortars, 2 copies of Anger of the Gods to go along with a couple copies of Destructive Revelry. Got a Polish Crusher, has a Burning Earth. You also find a couple of the Mistcutter Hydras and a couple shots as well, so it can really lower his curve down, take out some of the bigger cards that may not do very much. I like Mortars a lot because I think overloading it is very realistic in this particular matchup. I'm not sure how much I like Shock, but if he feels that he's the control deck, Shock may be necessary. Anger of the Gods, just another Pyroclasm-esque effect that I actually like a lot against Gates' deck.
Yeah, Anger of the Gods seems excellent to me. I think Nicolo is much better suited to be more of a control deck. I assume much more powerful things to ramp into with Nykthos. Time is on his side. James's edge comes a lot in the early game, and the amount of range that he gets from Fanatic of Mogus supplemented by all of his cheap, aggressive creatures.
Yep.
James's side of the side, in James's sideboard, we have 4 copies of Boros Charm, 3 Chain of the Rock, of Mortars, 2 Assemble the Legion, 4 Fire Drinker Satyrs, and a Perforos God of the Forge.
Okay.
I like bringing in the additional removal. I also think that James may want to consider moving into the Boros Charms, both because he needs to take a more aggressive role in this matchup, and because it's reasonable that Nicolo has Mizian Mortars or some other sweeper, and the Indestructible can protect him from that as well. So.
All right. Well, you see both players kind of going to their sideboards right now. I'd like to see a more competitive game, too. Depending on, I guess, which side you're on and who you're rooting for.
I just like to have a variety of games.
Yeah.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
If we we covered all these matches, and every single one ended like that, then that would obviously be disappointing for the coverage.
Yes.
But if we never had a game like that, I feel like we would be being dishonest. It would be a disservice, actually, to Magic's coverage. You want to show the full range of what happens. That's my opinion.
All right, I see what you're saying.
Maybe sensationalize it a little bit, but let's color inside the lines. Let's show let's show what's really going on here. I don't want any fancy editing tricks, or just show the games as they happen. Sometimes you just eat the bar. That's just a thing that happens.
That's just what you do?
That's just what happens.
All right. Well, both players will be shuffling up here again. Gates sitting at 6-0, as is Nicolo. Devotion strategies look to be, what people should be doing right now. But it's kind of interesting because, it's not mono black devotion, it's not mono blue devotion. It's kind of these red devotion decks, which have not really put up the same results as the other two decks that I just mentioned, that are kind of, having a nice day so far.
Yeah, devotion is, to me, somewhat of a misnomer on how to frame these decks because all that devotion implies is you're playing with permanents that have colored mana.
Sure.
That's a really broad range of things you can be playing,
Sure.
right? So these devotion decks all have different takes on them. Almost all of them are using Nykthos as part of the payoff.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're going any further than that, whether it's with Grey Merchant or Fnatic or even nothing at all, just using it to facilitate big creatures and monstrous effects. There's a lot of different paths you can take with it. Devotion is a really open-ended mechanic, and that's actually what's really exciting about this standard format. Not to look ahead too far, but going forward, there's going to be obviously more permanents are going to be added to the sets, presumably more devotion cards as well. There's a lot of different paths these types of decks can take going forward as they incorporate new content, both as devotion payouts and just permanents with a lot of colored mana in their casting cost.
See, both players are going to lay out their 7 cards. Take a look-see. It looks like Nicolo actually has a hand where he doesn't need to peel a mana source. Looks like he's good to go this time. He's going to keep his 7. His Gates is going to take a look at his. He's got a Brain Emissary. He's got a Sacred Foundry. Looks like a Chain to the Rocks hiding out over there as well. It says, I'm happy enough, and game 2 will be underway, starting with a Temple of Abandon here for Nicolo.
I don't know if it's necessarily going to translate, but James's table demeanor and affectations, for lack of a better word, are among my favorites in the
business. They're top tier.
It's a real treat.
His presence at the table is always fun
awesome.
to watch. Yeah. Rakdos Cackler, the draw here for the turn. And Gates going to come out here with a Mountain. Maybe all right, we're going to see Burning Emissary into. There's a Rakdos Cackler unleashed past the turn back, so a very similar start that we saw in game 1.
Mm-hmm. Except, unfortunately, for James this time, he's competing against what appears to be a functional draw. So we'll see what kind of resistance Nicolo can offer.
There's a Burning Emissary. Here's mana, so it's going to be 4 of it. And there is a Porphyros, God of the Forge. So now there is some resistance, because that thing is active right now, too.
So James going to untap. Needs to find an answer to something here. Looks like he has some amount of removal in his hand, perhaps a Chain of the Rock.
Yeah, I think that card's worth taking a look at, and we'll bring up Porphyros on the screen as well for you guys at home, so you can see exactly what the God of the Forge does do. It's interesting because, we've seen a lot of gods, Thassa, Erebos, even Nylea have a lot of success, but Porphyros was the one that everyone felt was going to be the best one.
Yes.
And it hasn't really found its niche yet.
Well, it's the one that's most obvious. It's the most obvious one to incorporate into a deck. As you see James take care of Chain of the Rock and then a Mortars for...
That turns huge.
Frostborn with a big swing there.
Yeah. So Chain of the Rock takes care of the God. You see Mortars take care of the annoying Frostborn. Now it's, hey, do you want to trade your Burning Emissary with one of my threats here? Because if you do, your Nykthos is a lot worse then.
Yes.
Nicolo says, no, I'm just going to take 4 on the chin. That was a pretty good turn. I'm going to start by coming across with my Burning Emissary. Going to knock Gates down to 18, and we'll see what his follow-up turn is going to be. He's got 4 mana, and it's going to be a Fnatic Emogi. So here's a hit for 3 on the Devotion check. So Gates is going to go down to 15, but Fnatic, as good as the card is, only has 2 toughness.
Yes.
And so it's not going to win a fight against either of these creatures, as Gates draws an Ashes Zealot for the turn.
But an extra red mana now where Nykthos is back into the realm of being close to being a big mana producer, which could matter for something like Mizzy and Mortar.
Yeah.
So.
That Porphyros turn could have gotten out of control, though.
Yeah,
if that thing would have hung around.
A lot of these Devotion decks have, they have features very similar to ramp decks where they need a mixture of the early action and then the payouts. So they're occasionally susceptible to a single removal spell like we're seeing here. As a Fnatic from James. Shoots Nicolo for 4. And Nicolo's in this squeeze where he kind of needs to block to keep his head above water. But he also can't block because he needs those cards in play to achieve a critical mass for his Nykthos and other payouts.
Yeah, and that's what makes the Devotion mechanic kind of tough. As you see, there is a Mizzy and Mortars there in Nicolo's hand. He's also got another Nykthos, and then he just drew a Fnatic. So what can he do as far as generating mana? Because right now, Nykthos isn't actually going to generate any mana.
It's net neutral currently to activate, so.
So here's 4 mana. There is another Fnatic Emogus. So that's going to be for 4. That's going to knock Gates down to 11.
But James is representing lethal this turn, so some block needs to happen somewhere from Nicolo's side.
Absolutely. Now, we don't know what James has in his hand right now, but it will be time for Nicolo to actually start blocking. And you see he's not attacking, so it's time, I feel like, to block something.
I believe I saw an Ash Cell in James. Ooh, a Nykthos. Let's see if there's something big happening here.
Oh, boy.
So
He tapped immediately.
So we have 4 mana.
5.
Storm Breath Dragon.
That was a big play. Now, what happens if Gates plays the Ash Zealot first? Does that change anything?
Well, it's just kind of 1 mana, right? Because he gets 1 back from the Nykthos, so he can play both.
Okay. I mean, I think he'd be better off having the Ash Zealot out there than not, right?
Well, let's see here. He can block and block. This might be a hedge against mortars.
Okay, sure. Just having a follow-up threat?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it doesn't kill Nicolo and leaves him with nothing if he gets mortared.
Sure.
And this is also pretty... this attack from James also demands a response in some way. He has to block something, so he loses some amount of devotion. The Stormbath Dragon's still in play, so...
I think I would have liked to see if I'm James here and attack with everything. The reason for that being, if he attacks with everything, 4 in the air, and then you have to block the Fanatic, and then you also have to block another creature, or you take lethal, so then there'd be 1 less Fanatic in play, actually. So right now, Nicolo's going to sit at 2, but if he comes across with the Burning Emissary, then it actually has to be blocked because it would have been a lethal attack. So if that's the attack that Gates does make, then there's only 1 Fanatic left in play. I don't think there's any getting out of the situation. As you're going to see, Gates is going to block here, obviously. You're going to go down to 7 from the Fanatic hit. But I'm with you where he might just have been sandbagging that Ash Zealot on purpose.
Yeah. So this dragon basically demands a mortar.
Yep,
so
which it's going to bite. Now there's a Nykthos that's going to die. 3 mana. Anger of the Gods. And shows him Ash Zealot, and that's going to do it. So, James Gates is going to win this match. 2-0. Red-White Devotion defeating Red-Green Devotion. He's going to move on to 7-0.
And so when I was